It's always great to be here. I actually spoke at one of Jeffrey's events a couple of months ago, and everywhere he goes, there's always a very warm and cordial environment and vibe. So thank you, and I appreciate it. I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about myself, but I do want to give you a little bit of context of why I am here and why I'm talking about this particular subject. I started out life as a serial entrepreneur. I dropped out of Duke when I was 19 and started an internet company, an e-commerce company, about a week before Jeff Bezos started Amazon. So I've always been big into free markets, capitalism, liberty. Sold that company, became a venture capitalist for a little while. Then I started a healthcare company in 2004, focusing on the obesity epidemic. And this was a very straightforward concept. The idea was to reward employees for losing weight, pay them cumulative rewards. So you want to reward them for losing weight and keeping it off over time, because that's where they see the health benefits. That's where the company they work for sees the savings and insurance costs and improvement in productivity. So we launched this, and it was a very successful company. We had, when we would sign up a corporation, 60% of the entire company would sign up. And we actually structured this so that if you were overweight, you could earn rewards for losing weight. If you were at a healthy weight, you earn rewards for maintaining a healthy weight. The company was profitable, flourishing, and then it was destroyed by Obamacare, Dodd-Frank, and Attorney General Eric Holder. And this is how it worked. In typical fashion, Obamacare came in and said, you can't use financial incentives and reward people for results. You can only reward them for trying to be in a weight loss program, which basically destroyed our business model. But with that said, we were paying people rewards. We were either giving them debit cards or using checks. We were actually using a check vendor here in Connecticut. Because of Dodd-Frank, the vendor that was doing the debit cards was Citibank, actually, ironically, could no longer provide that service. That was discontinued. The check writing vendor, who had been serving customers for 30 years, then the way this works is, like, our company would fund the checks, and other companies would fund checks, and they would have one pooled account. So Eric Holder came in and said, we think one of your companies is involved in illegal offshore gaming. So they seized everybody's money. And they didn't give us a path to even justify that we weren't part of that. So we bounced checks for $500,000 to nurses across the country that were participating in a weight loss program. So, long story short, this destroyed my company. And as I like to say, hell hath no fury like an entrepreneur scorn. And so this got me along the path of political activism. So I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project. Eventually became the chair of the Free State Project, was running a Republican Liberty Caucus organization, started a super PAC, helped get 100 people elected, and then ran for US Senate myself. Intentionally as a protest vote. I won't go into detail, but I cost Kelly out her Senate seat, and it turned into a whole ordeal. Got into a bunch of lawsuits. And the one thing that I would take away, and I will say this, I mean, because this isn't a political conversation, but it's ironic, because I'll get back to this. My stepmother was involved in politics as well. She started out in the Republican Party in Florida at just a very low-level precinct captain, ended up becoming the chair of the state party of Florida, then became the co-chair of the RNC for the entire party, and then became Trump's ambassador to Costa Rica. And so I've seen the political process up front. And so what I will say is, after 15 years of my own activism and seeing her experience, I have zero hope in the political process as a way to stop what is coming and to stop what I'm here to talk about tonight. You can't do it. We have a uniparty in Congress. I mean, did you know there are 51,000 federal laws in the U.S. federal code? That doesn't include regulations. That doesn't include case law. In fact, everybody in here, I guess, on average, commits about 3 felonies a day. Four. Exactly, four soon. And so So how do you unwind this? We have politicized courts. We have a deep state that isn't even accounted for in the Constitution. And what we're facing is not a Republican versus Democrat issue. We're facing a global threat of one world government. This is the existential threat that we are facing. So after I did my political activism, I gave up all that. I said, I'm done. I am going to, I started doing meditation. Maybe it was a midlife crisis. I don't know what you want to call it. But no, my wife's not happy. I lost 150 pounds, did a whole bunch of stuff like that, and I moved entirely into cryptocurrency. So I learned about cryptocurrency in 2012 as part of the Free State Project, had been in Bitcoin, and then I said, this politics is over with. So let's focus on how do we separate money and state, and how can this underlying technology be used to fix everything, voting, capital markets, you name it. So I went all in. So I'm done with politics. I mean, it's funny, I hadn't seen Jeffrey in years, and then I'm like, I just disappeared until like 2 months ago. In fact, his talk was the first talk I've even given publicly about this issue. But then we experienced COVID, and I experienced it just like everyone here experienced it as well. I remember going to my 11-year-old kid's ballet recital in February in New Hampshire, outside, with my daughter and all of the other dancers wearing a mask, with the parents social distancing in lawn chairs. So I went through that. Now, fortunately, I was already ahead of the curve on the fact that I know government generally doesn't act in the best interest of its people, but my beautiful and brilliant wife, Eileen, who I hope you get a chance to meet her, she was way ahead on this vaccine issue. She was the chair of a vaccine choice organization in 2005, 2006, and tried to put legislation in place in New Hampshire that, had it passed, it fell short by like 33 votes out of 400. Had it passed, a lot of the mandates that ended up costing people their jobs and everything else wouldn't have been in place. So thanks to her, I certainly didn't consider taking the vaccine, and my kids didn't take the vaccine, but yet they were the only ones in their school not to take the vaccine. So anyway, so I'm looking at this, out of politics, but now we have this COVID tyranny. I'm in crypto, and then all of a sudden, I see a crackdown occurring within the cryptocurrency industry. The person who introduced me to crypto is a guy named Ian Freeman. Yep. Ian introduced a lot of people, including Roger Ver. He introduced Roger Ver to crypto. And all of a sudden, he's facing 70 years in prison for selling Bitcoin for cash. 70 years in prison. Money transmission laws, money laundering, everything else. JP Morgan can work with Jeffrey Epstein, that's a fine. But Ian's looking at 70 years in prison. Another fellow Free Stater, Jeremy Kauffman, who started Library, the SEC targeted him and destroyed his company, basically, after 5 years. So I'm sitting here looking at this and saying, well, I'm in crypto now. Crypto's supposed to be the alternative to this. Why did COVID happen? Why are all of these, there are a lot of scams in crypto, but why are all of these pro-liberty people that are working on decentralized crypto, why are they going to jail and having their business taken away? And it turns out it all comes from one source. There has been a big movement to create one world government, a technocracy controlled from the top down, where your money is controlled centrally and digitally with social credit scores, systems, vaccine passports, the whole 9 yards. And so I realized, well, we need to fix this. How are we going to stop this? I already know we can't do it politically. It doesn't matter what a presidential candidate says. We don't even have until the 2024 election. This will probably be implemented before then. And once that happens, if we thought COVID tyranny was bad, what would COVID tyranny have looked like if they could shut off your bank account with the click of a button? Which is exactly what they intend to do. So I researched the issue, and I've already been entrenched in crypto for 10 years, and I took all of my experience and running think tanks and doing things in Liberty, and I realized, well, we have to stop this global tyranny. And the best way to do it is to stop fiat currency before it turns into central bank digital currency. So what I'm here to talk to you tonight about is a whole variety of things. It's going to be a condensed version, hopefully, of my book, which the final countdown, Crypto, Gold, Silver, and the People's Last Stand Against Tyranny by Central Bank Digital Currencies. So I got paid by the letter for the subtitle. But the point of the book is to make the case of what global tyranny looks like, where it came from, what the ideological roots are, the current global state of CBDCs, the history and the state of fiat currency, and what the alternatives are, how we get out of fiat currency and into these self-custody alternatives of crypto, gold, and silver. And the book goes into specific detail about how to do this, how to obtain crypto, how to obtain gold, so on and so forth. So I'm not going to go into a lot of that level of detail, but I am going to go into some of the conceptual pieces of it. But what I found is, again, politics doesn't work, but what we've learned is boycotts work. So if a boycott, frankly, I'm not all that concerned about pronouns or Bud Light, but I understand the spirit of it because it demonstrates and it proves that boycotts can work. We've also seen it with Target. But I'm not concerned about protesting pronouns or gender. I'm concerned about halting CBDC, stopping World War III, and ending the Federal Reserve. That's an activism project that I can get behind. Should I be standing away from this, or am I, is it good? Okay, it's a little staticky here. And the one thing that can stop all three of those is actually a bank run, or what I now call fiat exit, exiting fiat. So that's the strategy, and then I'll kind of walk through how I got there and what the details are. I'm going to start with kind of a fictional story. So imagine we're in 2032, we're in New York City, we're living under a one world government scenario where there's central bank digital currency, everybody receives UBI, universal basic income, there's a social credit system, and the social credit system applies to your entire family. So what your one family member does affects everyone else. Is it conflict between, no? Okay. That's right. NSA.
Maybe step away from the speaker.
Yeah, maybe a little.
A little further from the speaker.
All right, there we go. I think that's better.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, so it's 2032. We're in New York, one global government, UBI, CBDCs, social credit scores. We have a family, mother, father, 2 kids, a college-age daughter, high school-age son. And at the beginning of our story, the family has a very excellent credit score. And what this excellent credit score allows them to do is have access to basic transportation services, high-speed rail. They get to live in a pod in a skyscraper building. They have access to basic education and basic health care. Now, as we go through this story, we're going to walk through a series of unfortunate events. So the father shares a post on social media talking about decentralized cryptocurrency. He gets found out, and now the social credit score goes from excellent to very good. The mother then sells $700 worth of goods on eBay, fails to report it to the IRS, pushing the credit score down to average. The daughter, while in college, uses the wrong pronoun when talking to the professor. And now the family's credit tier has gone down to very poor. And now they're very poor, they're a different class of citizen. Now their pod is downgraded. Now they live in a one-room pod for the entire family. They no longer have high-speed rail. They can only use the bus. They have very low-quality healthcare options. And the daughter is struggling to even be able to stay in school because they publicize these social credit scores, and that can be used and factored into employment and educational options. So the father decides he loves his family. He wants to do everything that he can to help. So he's offered the ability to participate in the MAID program, medical assistance in dying. And if he uses a special medication to stop his heart, that will boost his family's social credit score back up to the excellent level. So he goes through with it, and obviously there's a lot of crying and anguish amongst the family. But the credit score is back on top, and the family is now able to try to regain footing. The son, having difficulty dealing with the emotional trauma of the situation, starts using opioids and gets into an accident, dies in a car crash, and now the social credit score goes down again to average. The daughter takes an experimental vaccine for acne, which causes all kinds of side effects. Now she's no longer able to go to school. She's no longer able to hold down the job. Now the social credit score goes down once more. So now the family is sitting there. The father's dead. The son's dead. And the mother and the daughter are sitting there saying, how did we get here? And maybe we should do the MAID program ourselves. Now that's my cheery opening. It's great at children's birthday parties, and I know it sounds extreme. The problem is everything that I just described, every surveillance technology, everything that's tracked, every activity that was punished exists in a developed nation on this planet right now. So I'll walk through some of that. Let me try not to get too close. Oh, let's see. Yeah, I can probably remember most of it. So I'll start with China, who's really on the cutting edge of this. And before we get into that, there are a lot of people, especially politicians, that'll say, China's the enemy. Russia's the enemy. China is the test case. China is what the playground for the globalists who want to take what they learn and transfer the technology and the learning across the globe. China today has 626 million surveillance cameras. Am I too far? 626 million surveillance cameras in this country. They track every movement. They now have AI. They have facial recognition, and they track everything that their citizens do. They've implemented social credit systems on a province-by-province basis, but what they measure and reward is at the granular level of if you put something in your shopping cart that they don't like, even though you made a decision to put it back, you can get punished for that, for bad intent while shopping. If you do anything about speaking out against the government or anything that's a financial crime, that is the most severe penalty that you can get. If you don't visit your elderly parents frequently enough, they'll take that away. If you cheat on a video game, that counts. This is a nightmare surveillance situation. And today, 23 million people in China are at that lowest category, that very low, very poor category, and are blacklisted from basic services. And it only gets worse from there. So China shows that you can do mass surveillance at scale. But to me, the scariest words in the English language are, that will never happen in America. And the problem is, depending upon who you're talking to, a lot of people were blindsided by COVID and obviously that level of tyranny. But we know what we experienced. We know, and it's funny, I did leave out one part of this. Not only am I promoting this concept, I'm running for president of the United States. I always forget that. But to be clear, I'm not running for president of the United States because if you vote for me, I can change this in Washington, D.C. I am running for president of the United States specifically to bring awareness to this issue. And so, so when you look at what's going on politically, the Republican Party, so I live in New Hampshire, which is supposed to be the live free or die state. And then people will say to me, well, why don't you like Trump? I'm like, the least amount of freedom I've had in my entire life was with a Republican president in supposedly the freest state on earth with a Republican governor and Republican majorities everywhere. Like, I'm scratching my head. I can't resolve that particular paradox. Stay-at-home orders, lockdowns. Our governor was on TV every day pushing the vaccines, even though they weren't mandated. It was a daily, event having him do a press conference. And so we're not going to fix this politically, but Americans will sit there and say, well, we're not China. We're not communists. This won't happen here, even though we just experienced all of this. So I talk about the fact that there are 626 million security cameras in China. Well, there are 85 million security cameras in the United States. Our pictures are taken 75 times a day through surveillance cameras, above and beyond whatever pictures we take of ourselves and post online. Edward Snowden warned us about this. I mean, I talk about the AI and all of the tracking. One of the things that I was really proud about is that when I was chair of the Free State Project, Edward Snowden actually Skyped in and spoke at one of our events. He spoke at the Liberty Forum. And he warned us about the fact that the government, the NSA, is already managing, recording, and logging all of our internet traffic. They can look at us even when our cameras are off and our microphones are off. We've already built the surveillance infrastructure here. We did this in 2013, and now he's over in Russia, and we're sitting here talking about how China's bad, which is kind of an odd situation. So the surveillance infrastructure is here, and I do want to just take a look at this real quick. I feel like I'm missing something. So I want to talk about, so that we have the surveillance infrastructure, but in my little fictional story, I want to talk about the actions that this Johnson family was punished for, and talk about their real world, how that maps to the real world today. So the father was punished for sharing an article online. Well, we had this Mackey guy who is looking at 10 years in prison for sharing a meme about voting in Hillary Clinton. He was just found guilty and is waiting sentencing. So that already happens. The mother was penalized for selling $700 worth of goods on eBay and not paying taxes. Well, we already know the IRS has passed, they've already passed a law that probably starting next year, anything over $600 you have to report and is going to be taxed. The daughter who used the wrong pronoun, New York actually has some laws on the books that haven't been interpreted this way yet, but you could be fined up to $250,000 in New York for using the wrong pronoun. But the worst part of this for me is the MAID program, because that's the thing that I know sounds like the most outlandish, right? I mean, this father is not going to kill himself. They're not going to have a euthanasia program like that. That would never happen. Canada has a MAID program. And the Canada MAID program was used 10,000 times last year. So Canada euthanized 10,000 of their own citizens. Now, I could make the argument that there are compassionate reasons for people to go through euthanasia. So I'm not making the statement that it's necessarily a bad idea. But when it's the state deciding who uses euthanasia, it doesn't work out very well, as you might expect. The good news for Canada is harvesting organs is up, and now the MAID program is the #1 source of harvesting organs. But then you have some side effects. There was this woman, Christine Gauthier, I believe was the name. She was in the Canadian military, lost use of her legs, but became a Paralympian and won medals and was really enjoying her life and was enjoying being a Paralympian athlete. She appealed to the Canadian government and said, I need a wheelchair ramp. Can you please install a wheelchair ramp? You know, she's a veteran, lost use of her legs, doesn't seem entirely outlandish. The response she got back from the Canadian government was, well, if you're that hard up, why don't you just try using the MAID program? And she testified in front of Parliament and read the letter that actually said that. There are people, another story of a suicide hotline, a 20-year-old man called, he was depressed, couldn't find a girlfriend. They recommended the MATE program as a possible option. They've expanded the program. They've put $10 million more behind the program. They've lessened the criteria, so now the wait time between when you are presented with the MATE program and when you can actually go through with it, that time has been shrunk dramatically. And you can go onto YouTube, well, maybe not as of yesterday. I don't know if you all are aware, but apparently YouTube has decided that the World Health Organization will be the standard for all health information on YouTube, not just COVID related. So who knows whether you'll be able to find these MATE videos. But get the devastation of this. Imagine you're in Canada, and because of lockdown policies, your rent has gone up, and you can no longer afford to be in your apartment. And it's cold in Canada. So there are people choosing euthanasia as a way to get out of poverty that was created by the Canadian COVID lockdown policies to begin with. This exists today in Canada. And we all know Justin Trudeau has talked glowingly about China. And he's actually praised the Chinese lockdown protocols. And there's technology transfer, by the way. Half of the surveillance technology that we have in the United States comes from China. China is a global export of surveillance technology. So this is here now. The infrastructure is here now. The willingness to use it has already been tried. But when I went through this exercise, I asked myself, okay, I know they can do it. Why are they doing it? What is the ideology? What is the theory behind this? What's the game plan? And there are a lot of people in the liberty community that will say, well, government's incompetent. So no big behemoth centralized government could ever implement something like this. And so I started looking at the organizations that are behind pushing this one world global government. And there are 5 big ones. There's the UN and their Agenda 2030 program and 17 Sustainable Development Goals. There's the World Economic Forum. There's the IMF, the World Bank, and the Bank of International Settlements. So when somebody says to you, oh, one world global government, that's a conspiracy. Those 5 organizations employ 65,000 people and have an annual budget of $35 billion. They've been working on Agenda 2030 since 2015, so they're halfway through their program and their rollout. And when you look at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, they want to control every aspect of your life and every aspect of the environment. Well, then the question is, well, where did this come from? Did this just spring out of nowhere? Well, it turns out this has been a century in the making. In about 1919, the phrase technocracy was coined. And technocracy is a form of government where elites pick scientists and engineers to make decisions for society. And the idea behind this is, again, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. The idea is we can perfect man by merging man with technology, but that the only way to do that is by picking the best scientists and engineers. And of course, only the elite are capable of doing this. So this came about along with the development of sociology and kind of related practices in 1919, moving into 1933, where it fell apart. They had some civil wars and everything else, but this technocracy idea invaded FDR, and it certainly had its fingerprints all over some of the New Deal programs and some of the things that FDR put out. It was, I wouldn't say it was completely dead, but it was revitalized in 1974 with Rockefeller and Brzezinski. And Brzezinski was actually the guy who was the hardcore technocrat and wanted to reintroduce these concepts. So the Trilateral Commission was formed by Rockefeller, and they put together a concept and basically outlined what became the framework for the globalist movement. It was adopted the next year by the UN in 1974, and elements of it are basically the basis of the UN 2030 agenda, the UN Agenda 2030. So that's the lineage of this, going back all the way to 1919. Now, when you look at the UN and these other groups, when you look at the founding documents and the comments and the discussions, the UN was always about one world government. The first scientific director of the UN was Julian Huxley. Julian Huxley was a eugenicist and was an active promoter of one world government. And there's even a tie to H.G. Wells, who was actually previously involved with forming the League of Nations, and all of these people work together. Well, Aldous Huxley, because people will say, there are all these memes. Where are we now? We're at the intersection of Animal Farm in 1984 and They Live and all of these other things. The truth is the blueprint is outlined in A Brave New World. A Brave New World brilliantly lays out, and I've reread it twice in the last month since I did the first version of this talk, and it's chilling when you read Brave New World again after having not read it from this perspective. Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World as a satire against what his brother was actively doing at the time in the United Nations. So in A Brave New World, there's one global government. And when you read this book, there's no voting. People don't have rights. People are genetically engineered into classes, alpha, beta, gamma, all the way to epsilon. And you are put into your caste, and you are drilled at night with programming that tells you you respect your class, you're glad you're not part of the other class. Oh, I'm a beta, at least I don't have to work as hard as the alphas. Constant subconscious programming. It's a complete separation of sex and reproduction. Everything is genetically engineered, and people take soma, which is the drug that they use to escape reality. And at no point in this society are you to be left alone with your own thoughts. Well, I've done a couple of things, and I'm not going to go through all of the details of this. In fact, this might even be a separate book. But I took the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and I said, all right, if I look at these, equality, education, health, justice, all of these things, diversity and inclusion. And if I said to myself, how would I monitor these 17 Sustainable Development Goals? And then if I went one step further and I said, what if I'm monitoring and tracking this behavior, what incentives would I put in place for this in terms of rewards and punishment? And what you get when you go through that exercise is a lot like what is being rolled out in China. And the basis of all of this, the control point for all of this, is Central Bank Digital Currency. It's digital currency, because if they can control your money, they can control your behavior. Then I took it one step further, and I said, well, how do we map A Brave New World to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals? And it turns out all but 3, there's a direct map in terms of what the stated goals are from the UN versus what is displayed and discussed and structured in the book, with even quotes. I've even found quotes to kind of support and back up. So there's a direct correlation here. I mean, A Brave New World is a playbook for what we have to look at. So now understand, we have 65,000 people, $35 billion, all with, at some level, some vision that we're going to make man perfect. This is what's driving this globalist agenda, but it gets worse. The WEF, the World Economic Forum, has 1,000 member companies. The top 10 member companies have a combined market cap of over $8 trillion. They employ 5.6 million people, and they have $1.5 trillion of cash on hand. So if somebody says, this is just something I deal with dealing with the liberty community. They're like, well, we should just focus on New Hampshire. I'm like, these people have trillions of dollars in an agenda that says they're God. They literally think they're God. They believe they should design a religion. If you read anything from Yuval Harari, that's a nightmare. This guy is the intellectual hero of this movement. He's had quotes, the era of free will is over. We can use AI to develop a religion to get cohesion because we need to have cohesion. If people, once you go beyond 100 people or whatever it is, if people don't have some shared myth, society will fall apart. So these people believe they are gods. And to me, what's at stake here isn't about politics or even an election. To me, I narrow it down to, do we want a world of determinism or free will? Do we want a world that's centralized or decentralized? Do we want a world based on scarcity or abundance? And do we want a world based on fear or on love? And this centralized strategy is all of the negative access of everything that I just described. That is what is at stake here. Free will is at stake here if we don't stop this. So that is where I kind of dropped off in my understanding of what's going on. And so let me do a poll now, actually. How many think there is a conspiracy and a plan to create one world government and a technocracy? All right. So this is an easy crowd. So I'm going to go to the next question, actually, because usually I should do this before the section and then after to see if anything that I said actually took. But do you believe there will be a CBDC in the United States within 5 years? Okay. Well, this could be a faster conversation as well. So remember, I've been living off of cryptocurrency since 2019. I've been living this. I've been studying it. I've probably onboarded hundreds of people to crypto. And I started writing this book towards the end of last year. And my original thought was, oh, good, I'll get this out here. We probably have 1 to 3 years to stop this. And in fact, I was going to write 3 other books. I was going to do something on public health and something on public school indoctrination and big tech censorship and media, mainstream media infiltration. But by the time I was done with the book, I realized this is it. If we don't stop this, then all of the other things we're not even going to have the ability to address, because once the money is controlled, we won't even have the ability to protest or engage in the other topics. So here's some interesting facts. In 2020, there were 24 countries exploring the central bank digital currency. They hadn't built one, they were just at the concept phase. In June, when I gave this talk, there were 120 countries. Today, there are 130 countries. In the 2 months since I gave this talk, 10 additional countries are starting the deployment of a central bank digital currency. There are 11 countries today that already have a central bank digital currency. A lot of these are Caribbean islands, then you have Nigeria and some other countries, but of course China also has a CBDC. In China today, there are 261 million people that have a CBDC wallet. By the end of this year, everybody in China will have a CBDC wallet. It's now projected by the end of this year, 24 countries and over 1 billion people on this planet will have central bank digital currency. I have never seen a ramp up of technology, anything like that. And of course, I've been in crypto, and so people are like, oh, Bitcoin, wow, look at how well this is growing. Not growing to 1 billion people in 12 months. And so this is frightening. But then the question always becomes, again, because when I try to talk to people about this, they get startled. But then they'll say, well, we're not China. And I heard the chairman of the Federal Reserve, and he said they don't even know if they're going to investigate a central bank digital currency. So I researched that as well. What I found is the United States has already conducted 3 CBDC pilots. And I'll walk through a little bit about what each of those pilots are. But all 3 of the pilots have one common theme. They involved, and you can't make this up because this sounds so conspiracy that I think it's done on purpose. The MIT Multimedia Lab was involved in all 3 of the pilots. The guy involved that was the chair of the Multimedia Lab has been to Epstein's Island twice and also taken money from Bill Gates. You can't make this stuff up. So just as a precursor, that is all facts. I mean, I put all this stuff in the book, but this is all publicly available information. This isn't, there's no theory about it. The first pilot they did was called Project Hamilton. And this was MIT in conjunction with the Boston Federal Reserve. And they created a central bank digital currency that can process 1.7 million transactions per second. To put it in perspective, the current financial system can handle between 50 and 100,000 transactions per second. Bitcoin, which I'll get into later, can do 7. And people talk about Lightning, I'll get into some of the details, but the point is, they conducted that pilot from 2020 to 2022. Basically, they have the technology sitting on the shelf, and their conclusions were, well, it works technically, but we have to work out the legal implementation and basically how to sell it to the public. They did another pilot called Project Cedar, and this is a pilot for banks to communicate amongst themselves. This is for large value transactions. This is for doing transactions across the ocean, working with international banks. That was done out of the New York Fed, also with MIT, the Bank of International Settlements, and other organizations, and that pilot was successful. And that technology is sitting on the shelf once again, I would say waiting for a crisis to go to waste, to not go to waste, I should say. Then there's the third CBDC pilot, which was actually so jargon-laden that it actually took me a lot of time to walk through. And this one had the most institutional support. It had the Bank of International Settlements. It had 8 banks out of New York, the New York Fed, and everything else. And they gave it the most boring name you can imagine. It's called the Regulated Liability Network. And I'll tell you, it takes a lot of focus to be able to read a white paper called the Regulated Liability Network. But this is the most dystopian of them all. Because what this is a framework that says, we're going to create a structure that handles the interaction of CBDCs, one database that manages all CBDC transactions across countries. But wait, there's more. We're also going to use this framework to regulate and track decentralized transactions, stable coins, and assets that might be tokenized. So, it's hard to even talk about this without some jargon. Well, let me explain what tokenizing assets means. Imagine a future where there is no cash, there is no dollar. The only currency you can use to make a purchase is a CBDC. So when you go to the store, you go to the Apple store, and you say, I want to buy an iPad. Well, you can only use your CBDC, which is, of course, tracked to your identity. And then they assign a token to your iPad, a digital token, which is all stored in this regulated liability network. So now, when you say something the government doesn't like, or this thing is actually structured so that there can be multiple organizations providing control. You could have the Federal Reserve, and you could have DTCC, and you could have 3 different groups monitoring and collaborating over your transaction. So you say something the government doesn't like, they'll shut off your money, they'll shut off your access to your iPad, and they'll block your ability to transfer and sell your asset. So that's a next level of control that I think people are not aware of. So that pilot is ongoing, and you won't hear about that pilot much at all. But if you ever have any problems going to sleep, I recommend Googling it and finding the white paper. A couple of other things related to this. At the time when I gave this talk 2 months ago, the Federal Reserve was working on something called FedNow. That came out of nowhere, and now all of a sudden FedNow is implemented. Well, what is FedNow? FedNow is a payment infrastructure that basically allows for instant and nearly free payments between banks. Well, what does this mean? Why is this important? Well, if you've ever done financial transactions, if you're getting direct deposit, it's not instant. You may have to wait a day or two. Or if you get a check, particularly one from a bank out of state, you may have to wait 5, 7, even 10 days for that check to clear. If you are accepting credit cards, you have to pay 3.29, if you're the merchant, you have to pay 3.29% of each transaction plus like 30 cents. What FedNow does is basically eliminates all of that and allows for the direct payments between banks. So this is an infrastructure that could actually replace credit card companies, it could replace Zelle, it could replace all of these different things. But that's not the scary part. The scary part is it's the infrastructure that could be used to roll out a CBDC. That infrastructure has now been rolled out to, I think, 36 banks, including JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and some of the big guys. So this is live. Now, this has implications. What is this used for immediately? I'll give you one example. 99% of federal employees are paid through direct deposit. So this is going to be a mechanism that is going to be used right off the bat for everyone's wages and paychecks. But there are some people that will say, oh, we'll pass legislation stopping CBDC because you need you need to get legislative approval to create a new currency. And you do. You need to pass a law to create a new form of money. But you don't need a new law to create an infrastructure that determines how that money is sent back and forth between parties. So you could de facto use FedNow. You could regulate the rails already without even needing to add a CBDC. So this is live as of last month. So this is pretty frightening stuff. So when Jerome Powell says, well, we don't know if we're thinking about it, what that means is we could have this over a 3-day weekend because the technology is already in place. And I've heard some other theories that there's already kind of a shadow system where there's a ledger, a separate ledger that's tracking everybody's transactions within the bank, kind of paving way for this. But I haven't validated that. It's some kind of insider rumor, which I'll discount because what is publicly available is bad enough. So with that information, how many think we're going to have a CBDC in under 5 years? How about under 2 years? Under 1 year? All right. So this is.
Aren't you and the opposition candidate in Argentina going to stop it for us?
No politician is going to stop this. My message is, one thing that I learned when I went through my personal transformation process, because it's always, you get involved with these liberty groups and you move to New Hampshire, and liberty in our lifetime, and this is the pledge. The way you get liberty in your lifetime is by controlling your own thoughts, your own behaviors, your own emotions. Liberty is available to us at any time, and we often get caught up on these external adventures. Now, as much as I say that, Yuval Harari and all these other people would actually like to take away our free will. So that is actually at risk. But there is no political process to fix this. Because again, you could use FedNow as CBDC, but let's be brutally honest. Congress is controlled by the banks, the military-industrial complex, and big pharma. Politicians aren't decision makers. Politicians are selected because of compliance, because they're compliant. I know a lot of these people. And frankly, I will say I have been disappointed by people that, well, actually, I'll tell you a little story about this. When I went to New Hampshire, I had this like Galt's Gulch moment, like from Atlas Shrugged. The first time I went to New Hampshire wasn't as part of the Free State Project. It was actually to meet angel investors for my company. And this was like the most wild meeting I've ever had. So I go to this Nashua Country Club, and these old guys come in. Like the average age is like 70 to 80 years old. One guy sitting there, his name is Dick Morley. He invented the technology behind the floppy disk. Mort Goulder created a company called Saunders and Associates. He invented the word processor and was the director of intelligence and signals processing for Ford, Carter, and Nixon. Another guy comes in named Ralph Baer. He invented the video game machine, or the video game system. And so this is not, I mean, I've met with VCs and all this other stuff, and these guys are like, we've been building companies and investing in stuff for 30 years. And they said, here are our rules. If the CEO drives a BMW, if they have fake plants in their office, and if the founding team doesn't have 3 people, they're out. And so whatever their experience is, of all this investing, no BMW, no fake plant, got to have a team of 3 people. I've learned a similar story. Anybody who makes their money through cronyism and says they're going to take the money that they earn, become elected politically, and then push liberty, that is absolutely 100% going to be what in crypto is known as a rug pull. So that's just a little bit of a tangent on that. But in any event, so, all right, so we're all on the same page. And your question was, you know, are politicians going to solve it? No, politicians aren't going to solve it. This is up to we the people. This is about mass non-compliance. This is about civil disobedience. This is all we have left. But again, look at what goes on. And you know, it's frustrating having been in it. You see all of this stuff. The thing that I think was the most baffling to me was Q. There were people cheering on and waiting for martial law for people to come in and hold military tribunals and execute people on television, and somehow JFK Jr. was going to come in. People believed that. People believed Trump was going to drain the swamp and make America great. And I'm not just picking on him. Pick any presidential candidate going back as far as you can remember. Did they do what they said? Read my lips. There are no weapons of mass destruction. You can keep your doctor. We're going to build back better. It's all bullshit. So the question is, how do you convince people to not believe in something outside of themselves and take action, take direct action? And that's what I'm proposing. I'm proposing that people exercise their free will, vote with their feet, and boycott. It's not just about boycotting banks. And I actually had some issues with what do I call this? Because I've called it Bank Run Manifesto. And when I say that, everybody thinks of, like, you know, 1930s, a bunch of people outside with bags trying to pull their cash out so that they can put the cash under the mattress and then use the cash. The bank's not the problem. It's the fiat currency itself that is the problem. It's the dollar that's the problem. So all of the banks are problematic, but it's not about, oh, we're going to shut this bank down. It's fiat itself doesn't work. So, and I'm going to get into some information about that. So do you think the US dollar will lose its status as the global reserve currency within 5 years? All right, 4 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year. Wow, this is a great crowd. I don't even know if I should be talking. So no one is educated about fiat currency. Like, I find this interesting. Like, you know, you think about economists, people, accountants. I mean, they had this thing come up in New Hampshire, and it was like, well, PragerU wants to offer financial literacy programs through the public school apparatus. And there's this whole big uproar of should they do it and all this stuff about Prager. And I'm like, so by financial literacy, you mean you're going to teach them that fiat currency is a Ponzi and that every fiat currency in human history has failed? Is that what you mean by financial literacy? Oh, no, you mean you're going to teach people accounting. You're going to teach people how to do addition and subtraction on top of a Ponzi scheme. You're going to teach people to be compliant with a system that has never worked. So that kind of paves into what I want to say about fiat currency. when you look at the history of fiat currency, it has a 0% success rate. And a lot of times people will say, well, Aaron, you're suggesting we pull money out of the bank and go into these other self-custody alternatives. Won't that accelerate CBDC? Won't this make this work? You know, well, what are you going to try? Fiat? You're trying something that hasn't worked over 2,000 times. Maybe we should try something else. There was a guy who wrote a book called Dollar Days, and he examined 750 fiat currencies. And what he found is every fiat currency fails. The average fiat currency lasts 27 years. And then he lists like the top 7 reasons these fiat currencies fail. Economic mismanagement, corruption, war, technology, competition, inflation, so on and so forth. Those are the main reasons fiat currencies fail. And as you'll see as I go through this, the dollar is blinking red on every single one of these reasons that fiat currencies fail. And again, it's hard for people to even think about this because the dollar has been the global reserve currency for 103 years. So everybody in here has just grown up with the dollar as the reserve currency. Why would you even question it? It's just always been the way that it is. But history tells another story. And I could go through example after example, but there are, some funny ones. There's Rome. The Roman denarius was their silver coin. I got to figure out what exactly is causing this. The silver coin in Rome, by the end of the Roman Empire, was only 0.5% silver. So that's the level of debasement in Rome. In Berlin, the German currency after World War I was so useless that a woman would go to the grocery store with a wheelbarrow full of cash and come back and the wheelbarrow was gone. People know about the Zimbabwe $50 trillion bill, which is now something that you can buy on eBay and something that people keep as kind of a souvenir. And while those may seem like distant examples of fiat failure, I think Argentina just announced yesterday 118% interest rate. Russia, I think, announced 12% today. I mean, we're in the middle of a global fiat collapse. China's collapsing, everything's collapsing. This is happening right in front of our face. But when it comes to, again, global reserve currencies, we've been the global reserve currency for 103 years. The 5 global reserve currencies before the dollar lasted an average of 94 years. So,
keep going.
all right. So we're clearly near the end on that. And I could talk about the Federal Reserve, but as probably everybody here knows, the Federal Reserve isn't federal. It doesn't have any reserves. It's a scam. It's probably not constitutional. It's legalized theft. And the IRS was formed at the same time as the Federal Reserve. And in essence, the IRS is a collection agency for banks. So this banking model is pretty neat. I start a bank. I create money out of thin air based on an IOU from the government. I then loan money out that I printed out of thin air and charge you interest that was never printed originally. Then I increase the interest rates. There's not enough money for everybody to pay off the principal and the interest, so I steal the physical assets that you use to pledge with the money I made out of thin air. That's banking. That's the Federal Reserve. People talk about FTX. There are a lot of crypto scams. There is nothing that is a bigger scam than the Federal Reserve System. So now let's talk about the grand old dollar. So where are we with the dollar? So the dollar used to be $20.67 would buy an ounce of gold. Then FDR came in and just arbitrarily said, oh, well, let's make it $35 an ounce. Then, by the way, happy belated anniversary. 52 years ago yesterday, Nixon took us off the gold standard. And by the way, when I talk to people and people say, oh, the dollar's going to last a long time, what are you talking about? This will outlast your lifetime. The failure of the dollar started 52 years ago. And as Hemingway said, somebody asked him, how did you go bankrupt? And he said, 2 ways, gradually, then suddenly. Well, we're 52 years into the gradually, and now the suddenly is sneaking up on us really quickly. But the story gets worse. Not only are we off the gold standard, it used to be that in 1992, banks were required to hold 10% of customer deposits in reserve, so that if you went to the bank and wanted to take cash out, they had some available. They never have all of it available. It's fractional reserve banking. This is how it works. Thanks to COVID tyranny, there are no longer any reserve requirements for banks. 0. So now you have a currency backed by nothing with no reserve requirements, and during COVID tyranny, we printed 40% of the dollars that have ever been in existence. That is the state of the dollar. That is the state of fiat currency in America. So, and I could go on and on and on about this. The dollar has lost, and this is another thing that's just mind-boggling. You know, I look up all these graphs, look up all of this information, and the graphs are out of date. It was, the dollar has lost 97% of its value 3 months ago. And then it was 98% of its value in June. And now we're accelerating and moving towards the dollar having lost 99% of its value. And the Federal Reserve and others will tell you, well, 2% interest, or 2% inflation, get used to that. That is just completely arbitrary. We have been psychologically manipulated to believe that that is the case. So I'm going to go through some of this quickly. I don't know, what's the, is there, am I,
We're getting towards.
we're getting towards the end. All right, well, the good news, I'll go through this. Everything else that I don't say is in the book.
Break the rules, go over.
So I'll say this. 48% of Americans are worried about the safety of money in the bank. When it comes to competition, we now have the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and 23 other countries that want to join BRICS. This bloc will have a greater percentage of the GDP than the West by 2030. And they are meeting on August the 22nd, and it's rumored that one of the things that they're talking about is creating their own currency backed by gold. So on and on and on, you know, money supply weakening. Even this week, the United States credit rating has been downgraded. Moody's downgraded 1/7 of the banking sector last week, and it's rumored that Fitch is going to downgrade all of the big banks this week. So in this example, we flash red on all 7. We are in the 4th turning. We're in what Ray Dalio calls the 16th or 17th stage of an 18-stage cycle, where 18 is collapse. In short, there's no real good reason to stay in the dollar. So I'll kind of wrap it up with this. What I have been promoting, I put this bank run manifesto or fiat exit manifesto up on Twitter on my website. It's been viewed 1.2 million times. My theory is this: because the banks no longer have reserves, because what the banks are holding are commercial loans, residential loans, credit card debt, things that are absolutely losing value. When you go in to take out your deposit, they have to sell these assets at a loss. If just 3% of us exchange our fiat for self-custody alternatives like crypto, gold, or silver, that would actually halt the banking system, and that would stop the march to CBDC. So that is what I am promoting. And it turns out the mainstream media is not really interested in projecting this idea. And the reason is, it's because it's dangerous. It's dangerous to the status quo, it's dangerous to the banks, it's dangerous to the military-industrial complex, and it might work because it doesn't require getting 50% plus 1 in a corrupted election situation. So in my book, I go into detail about crypto, what cryptos to look for, the same with gold, the same with silver. The punchline there is self-custody. Don't trust a third party. Don't buy crypto and leave it on an exchange. I've onboarded hundreds of people to crypto. Half of them didn't listen to me. It makes me sick when that happens. The same is true with gold. FDR confiscated gold 1933. He confiscated 75% of the gold. People that had their gold in vaults and in banks, they had their gold confiscated. If you had your gold at home, you were able to keep it if you so chose. Similar issues with silver. So with that, I recommend highly that you read this book. And you know, these are the only first editions left, but I wrote this book so that an average person without a finance background could get basically this talk in more detail, but then specific actionable information about how to get into crypto, gold, and silver. And the one final thing is, and because Jeffrey, I want to talk to you about this, I think the way that we stop the New World Order, the way we stop UN Agenda 2030 is by building a platform for citizens to basically boycott, starting with banks, but every one of the other 16 Sustainable Development Goals. And we use incentives. We reward people who are canceled. We reward people who voluntarily leave the system. We reward people who have the courage to share their story. And we fund the incentives with discounts from merchants that want to provide the alternatives. So I'll leave you with that as a concept and appreciate your time.